This video right here is of a professor named Richard Reeves, a scholar that cares about boys and men. And I'm playing it because it correlates to my movement, BMGT, Black Men Gotta Teach. Because if we are going to raise strong young men that are going to be helpful to our community, then we need them in the classrooms. Here's what Richard Reeves says about the structures that impact boys and something we can do to help improve the achievement of our boys.
Worry about in terms of a sex gap in terms of high school graduation, but there is now. There's actually a 6 percentage point gap in high school graduation rates, 88% to 82%, which is quite similar to the gap between white and Hispanic kids, which we know because that data is reported. And boys are only a little bit more likely to graduate high school at 82% than kids on free school meals at 80%. And so there is a real gender gap in high school graduation, but it took a small research project to get those numbers, going state by state to get the data. I think that's because we're still trying to catch up with a world where we do need to collect the data by gender, not to expose the ways in which girls and women are behind, but in the case of education, to expose the ways in which boys and men are behind. And importantly, the ways in which certain boys and men are behind, the ones from lower income backgrounds and black boys and men. But if we don't collect the data by sex, we don't get a clear picture of which boys are struggling the most, particularly by race and by class.
Richard makes a great point here. We have to disaggregate or separate out the large amounts of data that we have by race, class, and gender so we can see exactly who is getting what scores and what grades, who exactly is getting suspended, who is actually graduating, and don't do the flat blackness where everybody is black, even if you're just an African immigrant. And the reason we have to do that is because usually African immigrants come from a different socioeconomic class with a different set of circumstances, a different set of politics and history. So we gotta see exactly who are we talking about. Are we talking about ADOS, FBA, black males, or African immigrant first generation female? Who are we talking about? Who is getting what grade? Who exactly is getting suspended so we can cater our efforts to those people who need it? And if we don't disaggregate the data again by gender, then we won't see who's our most vulnerable population, which in this case are the black males, especially our Native American blacks, the FBAs, the ADOS, whatever, political term you want to use. But we have to disaggregate the data so we can be more exact in figuring out who needs what, because now we know exactly who is doing what.
What changes could we make to help boys in education?
At the risk of sounding boring, let's collect the data first so we know what we're dealing with here. I do think that we should be strongly encouraging boys to start school a year later than girls. I think that should become the default in many school districts because of the developmental gap that there is between boys and girls. Because boys' brains mature more slowly, then them starting school a year later would mean that they were developmentally closer to being peers with the girls in the classroom. We need a lot more male teachers. It's striking that the teaching profession has become steadily more female over time. Only 24% of K-12 teachers now are male. That's down from 33% in the 80s. And fewer men are applying to teacher training year on year. And so we've seen this steady shift towards a close to an all-female environment. Elementary schools is 1 in 10 teachers are male. That has all kinds of consequences for the ethos of the school, for the way we deal with different kinds of behavior among boys and girls, for example. And so we need a very serious and intentional effort to get more men into teaching.
As he correctly points out that if there is a difference between males and females, and the majority of our teachers are females, then what gets socialized is a female way of handling situations. And if we don't have males in the classrooms, then we only are allowing our children to be exposed to female ways of handling things. So it should come to no surprise that a lot of our males exhibit female behaviors as adults, because what they have been exposed to socially for the majority of their lives, especially in these classrooms, are female-led classrooms, and in many cases with our Black boys, female-led houses. That does not mean females are bad and they're horrible. That means they're not being exposed and socialized by men in the way men handle things. So that's very important if we're talking about the achievement levels and success levels of our boys and men, which I greatly think is important.